I'm going to start just a little later than I usually do, guys, simply because I think their schedule, there was a schedule change kind of late, so I didn't realize I was teaching you second period till late last night, so I'm sure you guys maybe have some students not realizing it too. So we're going to start a little bit later. It's not a long lesson, so it shouldn't be much of an issue. All right, but until then, we'll look at the focus question and do now. I'm going to start in a minute, guys. Just going to give everyone a little more time to get in here. Please have the focus question down. There's a 99% chance the people that have written in the chat that do now is correct.
I don't understand like how the executive order works, because like when you like put the Japanese people, like the Japanese Americans in the camps, doesn't that like violate the 14th Amendment or something like that?
Right. So for those two parts of the question. So an executive order is, it's not a law, but it's a temporary measure that the particular president or executive branch in place can do. Now, is it something that, you know, can be checked by the judicial branch and things like that? Yes, absolutely it can. But an executive order is a temporary, I'm going to call it a law, but it's not. It's just it's a temporary policy that is put into place by the government. And this policy is only active under the administration that's in place. So if Biden passes an executive order, the next president that comes in place could either keep it or get rid of it. Okay, it's kind of up to them. It's not something that, you know, stands the test of time like a law or an amendment. The second part of your question is, you know, does it go against the constitutional rights? And you know, that was under review in Korematsu versus the United States. That was the point in question, that it was going against the 14th Amendment. But the Supreme Court ruled that since we're in a time of war and since they're a quote unquote threat to national security, even though we know that's, you know, not correct looking back at history, they deemed that to be a national security issue. So they said, you know what, since we're in a war, this is constitutional and legal, because the Constitution does say if there's a rebellion, or if there's an invasion, or if there's a war, civil liberties can be curved a little bit, and that is one of those cases where they said that. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but that is the idea of why, you know, Executive Order 9066 by FDR was able to be passed and, you know, kept constitutional. But if you notice, at the end of the war, at the end of FDR's presidency, everything goes back to normal for Japanese Americans.
Yeah, I understand it now. It was just like a bad decision, like looking back in history, I guess. Then.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we do, you know, as living in 2021, we can judge some of these historical decisions for what they were. And that was, you know, I think everyone in class would agree it's a bad decision. Despite the circumstances that were going on, you shouldn't be taking away the civil liberties of any Americans based on who they are. I think that's an accurate statement. All right. So let's transition into today's lesson. The focus question is, how does the world try and avoid World War III from happening? And, you know, at this point, yesterday, we have looked at World War II. I do like to go back, and I want to, look, listen, I'm a U.S. history teacher, so I want to try and make sure I'm clear that the United States had a huge impact in World War II, and they did, okay, make no mistake about it. But I don't want you kind of looking at World War II as a situation where, the United States got involved and, everything changed. It was a lot of different things that, led the Allied powers to victory. There's a very famous meme. I'm not sure if you guys have seen it. If you have, please just tell me in the chat. But, how people think World War II was, you have, the United States kind of just come in and they dominate the war. And that's really probably not how it was. How it really was is, if you see here, you have all of these Soviet Union, I guess they're velociraptors in this case. They're using the examples of dinosaurs, the analogy. And, they're the ones that are really attacking, Germany and stuff. And, United States does still have a big impact. Japan's not as strong as they seem, right? Great Britain's played by kind of like this older turtle. And then my favorite one is France. France is played by a chicken, which I don't know why. I just find that kind of funny because they were out of the war within 6 weeks because Germany took them over. But really, when you really step back and take a look at everything, you have to kind of say that, the Soviet Union and them sending all of their soldiers and supplies in the battles between the Soviet Union and Germany was like the real reason, because Germany had to deal with the Soviet Union, in 1942, 1943, and that opened the opportunity for the United States to come in. So I do teach things from a U.S. history perspective, but I want to, be as clear as possible. This is something that, the Soviet Union had a huge part in winning, the United States as well. And, Britain even, I think, should get more credit than they do in this photo. I mean, them holding off the Germans in 1940 at the Battle of Britain was huge. So I wanted to share that with you. We didn't have some time yesterday, but I do think that is important to kind of see. All right. But today's lesson is, now that the war's over, we want to see how we avoid a World War III from happening, because after the nuclear bomb goes off, it becomes very apparent to everyone that if there's a World War III, I'm not being dramatic. I think this is the general thought. If there's a World War III, there won't be a civilization anymore. These bombs are too powerful, and there's this kind of butterfly effect that happens. Now the United States has an atomic weapon. What are other countries going to start to develop, to match our military might? They're going to develop atomic weapons too. All right, so we realize that, we can't mess up again as a world. So we established a couple of things to kind of prevent a World War III from happening. And things have been somewhat successful, because if you haven't noticed, you don't have a unit on World War III because it hasn't happened. All right. Yes. There's a quote, I don't remember exactly what it is, but Albert Einstein saying something along the lines of, because he was a part of making the atomic weapon, that if there is a World War III, World War IV will eventually become a war with sticks and stones, meaning that civilization will be wiped out. So yes, something like that has been said. Okay. So you guys are correct. After World War I, we try and create something called the League of Nations. The League of Nations was ultimately a failure because there's a World War II, but it had some kind of good things that we went about and did. So there's two things we need to wrap up and focus on. Number one is the Holocaust. We need to wrap that up a little bit. And number two is we want to look at basically two organizations that were put into place with their main goal being to protect and stop a World War III from ever occurring. So let's first start with the Nuremberg trials. I'll give you a minute to copy it down. This is a very straightforward thing. We kind of talked about the Holocaust. We looked at what it was. We looked at why it happened. We looked at the horrors of it, but we never really talked about what happens after. So this is now what happens after. So I'll give you a minute to copy this down. Okay, so we have a situation here that, basically, I don't know if I did a great job explaining this, but when World War II ends, so does the Holocaust. When Germany surrenders, the Holocaust ends, and pretty much all of the Jewish survivors do end up going free, with the exception of some unfortunate incidents at the Auschwitz camp, which I think I mentioned. They killed all the people as the war was ending, which is just like a horrible thing. But there were groups that did survive. And now that the war is over, okay, we need to kind of hold people accountable. So I need to start with this basic question. So I need you in the chat to answer. Let's say Mr. Panio goes off to war, let's say World War II. And in that war, I'm a soldier and I end up shooting and killing, 4 Nazi soldiers. When the war's over, do I go to jail? Okay, very good. It's a war. Okay, those are the rules of warfare. I am put into war. That's one of the things I have to do. So even though I'm committing murder, I'm not going to jail because it's a war. But even in wars, there's certain things you can't do. One thing we looked at after World War I is you can't use chemical weapons. Okay, that's known as a war crime. You can't just round up and kill innocent people. Okay, you can't just go, if someone surrenders, you can't go shoot them. Okay, you're supposed to take them as a prisoner of war. So there's certain rules of warfare. At the end of a war, you look back at the war and you kind of look at the situation. So obviously what Adolf Hitler did by rounding up the Jewish people, putting them into concentration camp, killing over 6 million of them, is the ultimate war crime, okay, or a crime against humanity. So no doubt about it, Hitler is the #1 person responsible for the Holocaust, okay? But Hitler kills himself. So we have a decision as a world, like, we need to hold the people accountable for the Holocaust. Obviously, the main person's responsible, but there were many people under Hitler, there are many people carrying out some of these things with the Holocaust that deserve to be punished for their war crimes, okay? And what you see here is in Nuremberg, there, out in Europe, there's going to be a bunch of the leaders of the Holocaust, all right, put onto trial. There's going to be like a mass trial that's going to happen, and each particular person is going to be given a punishment. All right, if you kind of look, it's very tough, but if you look from left to right here, some people going away for 10 years, some people going away for life, 20 years. Many of the people, as you could tell, though, were sentenced to death. They were sentenced to hang, okay, for their doings with the Holocaust, basically. And many Nazi party leaders who do not commit suicide, were sentenced to jail for their crimes against humanity. And this is just one way of holding the people accountable for what they did. And this is a message to future, leaders of countries that if you partake in a genocide, there's going to be a punishment that usually comes with you going to jail, or you're going to be executed by the government. How do they find out their crimes? Well, you have a lot of Jewish survivors, so they could testify that certain people were carrying them out. You have documents of Hitler, giving orders to certain groups of people, and those groups of people carrying them out. It was pretty well documented. The German government documented everything, so you had information to that. You had witnesses coming out, basically explaining what some of these people did. And, it became like a real trial, investigations, and they were able to figure it out. So these are the Nuremberg trials. These came after World War II. Can you ever take back what happened with the Holocaust? Absolutely not, but if you want to have some sort of justice and some sort of accountability in the world, this is the only way to kind of do it. You can't go back and change what happened, clearly. All you can do is hold people accountable and, hope that never happens again. Have we had genocide since the Holocaust? Yes, unfortunately. There's been a couple. We went over a few of them, but nothing as bad as the Holocaust. So maybe these Nuremberg trials were a message to leaders that, you got to make sure you do the right things, sort of thing. All right. Let's take a look at this question before we go into the meat of today's assignment. The primary purpose of the Nuremberg trials following World War II was to determine the guilt of innocence of what? Easy question today, maybe a tougher question tomorrow or later on. Okay, very good one. Not to get too far ahead, but when we start studying and reviewing for our final, our Regents, which will actually kind of start next week, believe it or not. We kind of do some small things to kind of help us review. You'll learn, you kind of want to just remember just a few words about something. So if you remember the Nuremberg trials has to do with the Holocaust, you'll pretty much get every question right. All right, this is the meat of today's assignment. We are going to have a huge influence, the United States, in creating two major world organizations, both of which exist today. They have their pros, they have their cons, but we're going to see why we created them and what they both are. So you're going to look at NATO and you're going to look at the United Nations. So take a minute, copy them down. The United Nations is definitely the more important one, but you need to know both. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is, before we go over NATO, okay, is I want to label the governments around the world in the 1940s. So what types of governments do we have? So we obviously have democracies / republics. What are some other governments around the world that we have learned about at this point? What are some other governments that countries could be? Okay, fascist, very good. Very big one there. Communist, socialist, okay. And what's the one with the kings and the queens? Starts with an M.
Monarchy.
Monarchy, very good. Okay, so let's say, okay, a dictatorship, yeah, we could say that. We'll put that under fascist. But, let's say you have 4 different types of governments. Are there more? Yes, but let's say the 4 main ones, okay? You can only be in NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, if you are in the North Atlantic area. Okay, so what does that mean? That means North America and Europe, mostly. You could really only be in those areas. If you're in those countries and you are a democracy, you are going to be put in something called NATO. Now, if you are a communist country, you're going to be in something else called the Warsaw Pact, but we're going to learn about that a little bit later. But basically, to be in the NATO organization, the club, you have to be in North America or Europe, and you need to be a democracy. Okay, that is the exclusive invitation to the club. And what I'd like to say is this specific group, okay, is going to be basically a team of countries that are designed to protect and promote democracy around the world. Go back to why World War II started, even before Hitler, even before anything. It was a war between 2 ideas: freedom, rights, and democracy versus control, authoritarianism, dictatorship, fascism. That's really what the war was all about. So the world recognized this. So he said, okay, we want as many countries around the world to be as democratic as possible. So places like Africa, South America, Asia, that are maybe a little bit poor and struggling, we want to basically promote democracy and freedom there, okay? With that being said, they also want to protect one another. So NATO is just as much about promoting democracy, but also protecting each other in North America and Europe, okay? After World War I, America and North America becomes isolationist. They don't deal with any of the problems out in Europe. That becomes a huge issue. Because once World War II gets really bad, okay, by that point, the United States has to enter, and it's almost too late, sort of thing. All right? So this is an organization and countries designed to protect one another. The thing you'll see on the regions is collective security. Okay? When you do something collectively, you do it as a group, and we should all know what security means, trying to protect one another. So that's what NATO does. They try and protect one another and promote democracy around the world. Okay. That is somewhat important, but not as important as what you need to learn about right now, which is the United Nations. Okay. So it doesn't matter if you're fascist. It doesn't matter if you're a dictatorship. It doesn't matter if you're a democracy. It doesn't matter if you're communist. Everyone is invited to the United Nations. If you are a country on planet Earth, you get an invite to the United Nations. Okay, if you're a sovereign country on the Earth, you get invited to the United Nations. Okay? The United Nations' main goal, I'm going to tell you right now, is to prevent a World War III. Okay? And to that extent, they have been successful. Now, the organization has had some issues. The organization does, isn't a perfect organization, but in terms of its main goal, it is there to stop a World War III from happening. Okay? So let me ask you this before we even go forward. There are a couple United Nations locations around the world. Does anyone know where one is? Where is the one meeting place for the United Nations? Yep, downtown. There's one here in New York City. Okay, and if you go to that one in New York City, you'll see something like this, right? You'll have all of these photos outside. Those are all of the members of the United Nations. And if you were to go into the United Nations, okay, I'm gonna wanna get too far ahead, but you're gonna notice in their meetings, you're gonna have representatives from all different countries. Okay, you have a representative from the United States, you have a representative from China, you have a representative from every single country that's in the United Nations. And they're all wearing headphones in the meeting. Does anyone know why they're all wearing headphones? No one hears them. Well, they hear them, but they need translations. Okay, I speak English. If someone is speaking from China, I don't speak Chinese, right? Many world leaders don't. So everyone's speaking together, and they're all on their headphones listening to the translations. Okay, so what are they discussing here? What are they doing? So they are, and I like to call it like this, and I think it's easy for kids to understand, the United Nations is like one big world therapy session. Okay, it's like one big world guidance counselor. Okay, they're all gonna meet and they're gonna discuss their problems. Okay, so this organization is designed to prevent a World War III. So they're gonna talk about issues and try and resolve things peacefully. So if there's a border dispute, if a country is angry with someone, if people are unhappy and poor, if there's a disease, the United Nations is the place where they're gonna discuss and talk about that. Okay, and the United Nations, okay, is going to be set up in a way very similar to the United States. Okay? Oh, well, Liz Mel, absolutely. Not a physical fight, but yeah, a lot of disagreements, a lot of arguments. Okay? So what I mean is the United Nations is going to be set up by the United States. Is one of the leaders of the United Nations was this lady by the name of Eleanor Roosevelt. Okay? She was the first lady of Franklin D. Roosevelt. She's one of the most famous first ladies in American history. Just one of those that just doesn't come up on the Regents. When I was in college, I had to write a 35-page paper on Eleanor Roosevelt. So if there's something you want to know about her, let me know. I know a bunch. But one big thing is she was tasked with the assignment after FDR passes away of, coming up with some ideas for the United Nations. So they have a declaration of, rights. Yeah, you think a 2-page paper is a lot. Wait till you get to college, guys. You don't choose history major. You do a lot of writing. You hate writing. All right. So, she's tasked with the assignment of coming up with kind of like a Bill of Rights for the world. They call it the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They're going to set up the United Nations like the American government. Okay. And you'll see that when we get to the reading, which we're going to do together. Okay. There's going to be basically a constitution. Okay. There's basically going to be different branches of the United Nations. The United Nations is going to have their own military consisting of a lot of different countries from around the world. All right. So I think the best thing we should do is now just go to the reading so you have a better understanding. All right. And then we'll come back to the Regents questions before you go into the assignment. All right. So let's pull up the reading. All right. Not the hardest reading, but I think gives you a general sense of what's going on. And you guys are in the Regents class, so I expect you to know how some of our different branches of government operate, whether that's going to be, our executive branch, our legislative branch, our judicial branch. I want to draw the comparisons between the two. All right. The internet here is a little bit slow, so we're going to give this a second to try and open. Is your guys opening on your end without a problem? Okay, I may have one of you guys just share your screen if this doesn't work. Let me see if I can try and open a new tab. Let's see. See if I can overcome these issues. Would one of you guys be so kind just to share the screen of the reading so I can read it together? Yeah, just go to presenting and take over. I think you guys can. It'll be annoying if you can't. Okay. All right, so I see Abigail presenting. Perfect. All right, so stay right there. All right, so let's look through Abigail's screen. Hopefully you guys could see it. I could see it right now. So let's say a concept. Well, they wanted a better League of Nations. The League of Nations had been a spectacular failure at maintaining world peace, okay, because World War II happened. Toward the end of World War II, FDR and Winston Churchill began to craft a new and better league. They called it the United Nations. It met for the first time in San Francisco right before the end of the war. The United Nations had more power than the League, and people hoped that it wouldn't do what the League didn't, which was maintain peace. All right, so let's look at the General Assembly here on the right, okay? The General Assembly at this point in time, you want to think of as like our legislative branch, okay? Our legislative branch has certain rules like passing laws, but it also does other things. So our legislative branch is consisting of representatives around the world. Our legislative branch is consisting of representatives from everywhere in the United States, whether it's in the House or the Senate. So will the General Assembly. So let's see how it goes. The General Assembly is the main assembly, the international Senate, so to speak. Every nation that is a member of the UN has one seat in the assembly. The General Assembly has many duties. Number one, it appoints the non-permanent members of the Security Council, which I'll talk about soon. It oversees the budget of the UN. It discusses important world events and offers potential resolutions to these events or problems. So this is what I talked about, a big therapy session. A big thing with World War II was Hitler just starts going invading all of these other countries. Japan starts going and invading all these countries, and no one does anything. Before someone invades, the rule is the United Nations, they want to talk these issues through. You don't want just people invading countries. Okay, this is a huge reason why World War II happened. Okay, there are 193 members of the United Nations, 193 countries basically. Nearly every sovereign nation is a member. The only significant non-members are the Vatican City, Taiwan, Kosovo, the Western Sahara, and Palestine. Okay, even North Korea and China, they're in the United Nations now. Okay, the Security Council. The Security Council is kind of like our judicial branch. Thank you for scrolling down. Kind of like our judicial branch, okay, because there's not many people in it. So what you're going to have is only 15 members of the Security Council, okay? 5 members have permanent status, meaning they are in the Security Council every year that the United Nations are there. And then you have 10 that are appointed by the General Assembly to serve 2-year terms. So this is like the checks and balances aspect we have in our country has been brought to the United Nations. So the permanent members are the United States, Britain, France, China, and now current day Russia, but it used to be the Soviet Union. So this goes to show you, it didn't matter if you were communist, like the Soviet Union and China, or if you were democratic, like the United States, Britain, and France, okay, it didn't matter your type of government. You're just a country, you could be in here. These members have a permanent seat on the Security Council. The non-permanent members always change. It's appointed by the General Assembly, and these nations serve 2-year terms on the Council. The General Assembly attempts to appoint nations that will represent areas from around the globe. So you want to get a few countries from Africa, a few countries from Asia, a few countries from North America, what have you. In order to authorize the use of military force, all permanent members must vote to do so. Any one of the permanent members can veto an action, meaning they could, stop a war from happening. Okay? Ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, I'll try and make this as clear as possible. Okay? The Security Council basically has their own military called the UN military, and they are supposed to go in and try and solve problems before the war countries actually go into a war. Okay? And if there's an issue, okay, you could always vote against it, but you're going to see over the last few decades of the world, when we're looking at some of our topics, that the Security Council has a very big role in this country, in the world. Okay, because remember how I said, yes, Liz Mel, correct, they could get reelected. Very good question. So you'll see, like when we look at the Korean War, when we look at the Vietnam War, when we look at the war in Afghanistan, you're going to notice the United Nations has a huge influence in these wars. It's not just the United States. They're called a coalition. Yeah, they fight together. All right. The jobs of the Security Council may include maintaining peace and security, establishing sanctions against an offending country. Let's talk about what sanctions are. A big thing you'll see is when a country misbehaves. Instead of going to war with them, the big thing you'll see is a sanction is put in place. That is a way to hurt their economy for what they did. And you may say, well, if you hurt their economy, why wouldn't they go to war? The response usually is that when you hurt their economy, it limits their opportunity to go to war because they're not doing well economically. So this is a big thing we did in the last few years with the country of Iran and North Korea. We've done this with Russia in the past. When you put a sanction on a country and it's voted on by the UN, it's because they've probably done something wrong. Okay, and of course the Security Council can authorize military actions. Peacekeeping forces are usually multinational. Many nations are going to contribute troops to the fight. All right, the Secretariat, okay, that is like the president. Okay, you have the serves as sort of executive branch, a president of sorts of the United Nations. The duty of the Secretary General is to do this. Okay, the leader of the UN is called the Secretary General. Help resolve international disputes, administer peacekeeping operations, organize international conferences, consult with various nations regarding UN initiatives. The Secretary General is appointed by the General Assembly after being recommended by the Security Council. So you see the checks and balances aspect. Every one of these groups has a idea and a thought, and they work together. The Council tries to select secretaries from around the world. The General Secretary serves a 5-year term, and most serve 2 terms. Okay, and I don't think you can do more than 2 terms, like the United States. So you see a lot of the similarities. The current Secretary General is Ban Ki-moon from South Korea. That is not true because this reading came out a few years ago. The current Secretary General, I should know this. I'm not looking it up. I'm definitely not looking it up because I'm a social studies teacher and I should know who the current Secretary General is because I obviously know that's Antonio Guterres. Okay, Antonio Guterres is the Secretary General. You can look, I think there's been 9 Secretary Generals throughout this time. I'm gonna look that up too. Why not? All right. I believe he's from Spain, the Secretary General. So he's the leader of the United Nations right now. So you don't need to know that's not in the Regis or anything, but like a president, they're going to be changed and elected and stuff like that. All right, I'm going to go try and go back to presenting now, and then you guys will do your reading. So let me see if you guys can see my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, 2 quick questions here. The main reason that the NATO organization was formed after World War II was to what? Okay, 1. This will be even easier once we get into the Cold War, because NATO is going to be put into place as an organization really to stop communist countries, which we'll talk about later. But you guys have a good understanding about that collective security. The principal goal of the United Nations has been to what? Let's see. 3 is the correct answer. Promote peaceful solutions to world problems. Gentiana said 1, develop military alliances around the world. I think that is a goal, but I don't think that's the principal goal. All right, we actually don't want to have militaries really working together We want countries to be working together for peaceful solutions. All right. So you have a good 8 minutes left if you want to. He's from Portugal, not Spain. Oops. I got to brush up my world history. I apologize about that. Yeah, he's from Lisbon, Portugal, right? But he lived in Spain a little bit. I'm looking at something. Okay, thank you for correcting me, Aura. That's the power of the internet, because you can prove your teacher's wrong in 2 seconds. All right. So you have 13 questions on the United Nations. We did the reading together. I don't particularly think it would be too difficult for you to do. So the questions are located here on the left. You do them here on the bottom, and then that will be it. I also should mention Textbook Thursday due today, and your Unit 6 test is Tuesday. We will spend tomorrow starting our review on World War II by watching a video and seeing some other things. Any questions before I leave you to it? All right, sounds good. I'll be here if you have questions for the last 6 minutes.